Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, author of the second edition of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. Welcome back to the show, Hilliard.
It's exciting to be here.
Hilliard, you woke up this morning with a new mayor in Edmonton, a former Liberal MP in the heart of Conservative territory. Was that a shock to you?
Well, in Edmonton, there's always been a streak of independents, and often doesn't vote for the normal Conservative government in Canada. I remember in one election years ago, it was under Don Getty, I think. The Conservatives at that time, called the Progressive Conservatives, only held one seat at Edmonton, and so there was quite a opposition. And it's always been a center of disgruntled people. So, but Amarjeet Sohi was city councillor as well, and then he was a Liberal MP elected in the first Trudeau election when they got the majority. But he used to be a bus driver in Edmonton and was remembered as being a bus driver in Edmonton. So he's got a lot of name recognition and a lot of connections to the community.
Right, and I guess he might be considered a working class hero if you're a bus driver. Plus, all your union brothers.
Yeah, I know. And also I think a very positive feeling about him. And the other, the sort of the more right-wing candidate, his name was Mike Nicol, and he was very controversial. He's been running for mayor for years, and he seems to delight in being a contrarian and being a little bit combative, and that just didn't really go over very well. So it never has. He did get up to second place. I think he was over 20%. So, and then there were about 8 or 9 others. So, and the other thing that happened in the election yesterday was there were a record number of women elected to councils. 8 members were female. So that's a precedent. And also in Calgary, the new mayor is female. For the first time ever, Calgary has a female mayor. So it doesn't seem like it seems like the if there's an old boys network, it's getting chipped away in Alberta.
Now, the mayor of Calgary said the first thing she's going to do is declare a climate emergency. How's that going to sit with the oil community there? Well, it's interesting about the oil community. It's actually amazing because the Alberta government, under the UCP, has been very much against a carbon tax, for example. And they've got some kind of new version of it with a different name. But the big Calgary oil companies have been supportive of a carbon tax. So it isn't a monolithic view, that's for sure. And I don't think the oil patch would mind a declaration of a climate emergency, because they are already getting very, very active in things like carbon capture, usage, and sequestration. The acronym is CCUS, and so they've actually convinced the federal government, if not the provincial government, I think the provincial government too, to put money into research into carbon capture and sequestration, because that will allow the continued production of fossil fuels for a while longer. But with the COP 26 coming up starting October 31st in Glasgow, there's going to be a lot of stories in the next 2 or 3 weeks about climate, and it's a difficult thing for Canada to get to the target. And who knows if they're going to make the target even more ambitious. Everybody's under pressure to arrive in Glasgow with an even more aggressive target. It's very difficult to see how the Alberta oil industry survives if Canada actually does what needs to be done to meet that target.
Is this a wake-up call for Jason Kenney and his Conservatives to have two left-leaning mayors elected in Alberta's two largest cities?
Well, you could say that it's a rebuke of the government, the provincial government, because there certainly doesn't seem to be any strong Conservative tone at the municipal level, and the Premier Kenney's approval rating is the lowest in Canada. It's something like 22%. So it's not a good time for the provincial Conservatives. That's for sure. They and some of it's their own fault. Some of it probably is just related to the fact that Alberta's got a very poor COVID record. The COVID-19 numbers in Alberta are much worse than the rest of Canada, and it's also a bit surprising in that there's another oil boom underway because the oil price is back up to $80. So there's actually quite a surge in oil revenue. In fact, the Alberta government will probably balance its budget this year. The fiscal year for the provincial government starts on April the 1st. So, but the money's been rolling in pretty fast in the last few months. So for them to be so low in the polls, opinion polls, is a pretty difficult situation, given that things are actually starting to look better for the economy in Alberta.
Alberta also held a referendum on transfer payments. What was the result there?
Well, I think the majority want to end equalization, according to the numbers late last night. But it was a small number, and of course, most Albertans don't actually understand how equalization works. They think that there's money actually sent from Alberta to the federal government, but that's not the way it works. There's actually just the fact that because Albertans have much higher incomes, and the difference is quite remarkable. The average family income in Calgary and Edmonton, at least up until the downturn in the oil patch, was pretty close to $100,000, a little bit over $100,000 in Calgary, a little bit under $100,000 in Edmonton, and the average for cities like Toronto and Vancouver were in the 70s, 72, 74,000. So it's almost 50% higher. So what happens is, for equalization, is the people pay taxes on their income, and of course, when your income is higher, you pay higher taxes, and it's a progressive income tax system, so it isn't linear. Actually, the higher your income goes, the more you pay exponentially. And that money doesn't all get spent in Alberta. It gets spent in other provinces like Brunswick and Quebec and Prince Edward Island and the so-called have-not provinces. So that's the equalization formula. There's a complicated formula which I can't fully explain, but there is a lot of misunderstanding, and the provincial government has not been helpful in explaining it. They've been putting out information which doesn't help people understand it properly.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth. Hilliard, we're pretty familiar now with the Evergrande crisis in China, but is there more to what's happening to their economy or not happening to their economy right now?
So their economy came out, GDP results came out at 4.9%. So China hasn't been, that's a growth number which hasn't been seen since probably in the 1980s. Like, China consistently was 8, 9, 10%, and then more recently it slipped down to single digits, but always above 5%. So this is the first time it's been below 5%. And in China, that's a very low number, because there's there's a lot of pressure on officials. The way they calculate GDP is the local officials come up with a number and then they send it up to Beijing and then they put the number in. So they're very reluctant to report a lower number. So one would guess that maybe the 4.9% is an indication that there's very little growth. But the bigger problem is in the real estate sector. So the biggest sector by far is real estate, and it's close to 30% of GDP. To give you an idea, Canada is one of the highest in the world, but Canada's probably only 15 to 20%. So it's much higher than the only country I could find that reached something like close to 30% was Spain back in 2008. And they just had a horrendous crash in real estate. And it was mostly foreign buyers coming in from countries like Britain to buy properties in the Sunshine Coast in Spain. But the crash was very, very severe. So any kind of a slowdown in real estate in China will really hit the GDP hard. 10% slowdown on a 30% component is 3%. So that would basically, at this level, would just about wipe out all GDP growth. And it's likely that the slowdown will be quite a bit more than 10%. Because, like, if you think of it as a Ponzi scheme, the money has to keep coming in. And once the money, isn't coming in as fast, the whole thing collapses of its own weight. And that's where we're at. So the new developments are some of the other companies in China, other than Evergrande, have failed to make their payments. So there was one called Civic, SINIC, and one called Fantasia Holdings. Neither of those are big, but the payments were pretty big. They were $240 million, somewhere in that range. But they're not the scale of Evergrande, which shows something like 300 billion US. It's just the numbers are just mind-boggling. So the big companies like Evergrande, and there's another one called Country Gardens, are probably seeing very slow sales, big slowdown in sales, which means they'll stop building, which means the Chinese economy could be hit very hard. But most people were expecting China to step in and provide a big stimulus. And a lot of that stimulus, like in Canada, goes into the real estate sector because they usually use interest rates and more bank loans as the main channel of stimulus to make a stimulus. And most of the bank loans and the interest rate component affects real estate more than any other sector. So if the real estate sector slows down or grinds to a halt, you could see it grinding to a halt with just probably temporarily, but if there's a surplus of properties, if China Evergrande and a couple other of the ones in trouble start to dump their apartments, and mostly apartments that they built, start to dump the apartments out at lower prices, very quickly people back away and say, well, I'll wait and see if prices can go lower. So it's just a very difficult thing. You cannot let the air out of the balloon slowly. It's you prick the balloon, all the air escapes very quickly, and that's the problem. But famously, in July of 2021, Xi Jinping said that houses are for living, not for speculation. And everybody keeps going back to this when they talk about the Chinese real estate sector, because this is a big change.
Well, he said that then, but obviously he didn't do anything. Friend of the show, Danielle Park, pointed out there's 190 million vacant properties in China. That's a little more of a surplus than you really need, isn't it?
Well, surplus, vacant, but they provide a use in that because there's no property tax in China, people use them as a store of savings. So literally there's families all over China, millions of families, tens of millions of families that own these properties, and they're not like apartments, condos in Vancouver and Toronto. They don't cost that much. They cost quite a bit less than that. They're often in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, and nobody lives there. The apartments are not finished. They're just sort of bare wall apartments,
but they're viewed by the family as a savings account, if you like. And they're going to be for the children and for the grandchildren. I don't know if it's going to work out. Obviously, my view is that all bubbles burst and all real estate bubbles burst spectacularly. So it's unlikely that it's going to work out for them. But that's what they believe. And they also believe, and this is what's so interesting about the last 3 or 4 months, they also believe that the Chinese government will always step in to stop the prices from falling, because the Chinese government knows that all these families have this savings habit where they use these properties. So they're surplus in the sense that nobody's living in them, but they're being used for a different purpose. And that's what Xi Jinping's saying when he says housing is for living, not for speculation. So up until now, the Chinese government, in 2008, 2009, the amount of stimulus that China put into the system was 3 or 4 times the amount that the U.S. did. And it was just spectacular. And it lifted all of us. Like, if it hadn't been for China doing that, who knows what would have happened in the global financial crisis. This time, they don't seem to be moving. And the government has sort of said to China Evergrande, we expect you to work your own problems out. Well, China Evergrande and probably the other companies in the sector, they have no hope of working their own problems. They don't have the money, and they can't borrow the money. So what can they do?
Yes. In other words, you're going to go bankrupt is what they're going to say. Now, my sources have told me, not only have there been demonstrations against Evergrande because, hundreds of millions of people invested in it, and for the people who work there, they were told you have to buy a property or you don't get your bonus this year. There've also been food riots. When we talk about supply shortages of a certain brand of bread or crackers or something, in China, they have entire stores that are empty, apparently.
Yeah, it's you sort of wonder if the other thing that besides food riots has been the shutdown of electricity. So that the coal price was too low, the coal price was too high, and the electricity price was too low, and so all of these electricity providers that use coal, which is a lot of them, almost all the small ones, that's what they use. They couldn't do it, and the Chinese government wanted them to do it, but they just couldn't do it. They couldn't buy the coal at a price that made electricity a loss. None of these companies, these small companies, have any kind of cushion to operate for very long at a loss. So they shut down. So that means all kinds of places had no electricity, and it's affecting the production of steel and other aluminum, things like that use a lot of electricity. So there's a lot going on, and I don't pretend to have all the insider knowledge. I don't think anybody really does. It's there's so much going on, and probably even Beijing isn't fully on top of it. So everybody's kind of holding their breath, waiting to see what Beijing is going to do. But so far, they've been very hands-off, very uncharacteristically hands-off.
The CMHC says Canadians are holding more mortgage debt than pretty well ever before. Is this a good or bad thing? Doesn't it just mean more Canadians have decided it's important to own a home?
Well, the debt that they're incurring is not necessarily related to wanting to live in a home, although a lot of that is that. The numbers are spectacular in terms of, for instance, the provision of down payments from the bank of mom and dad and grandma and grandpa. The average assistance, it was revealed recently, is $180,000, if you can imagine that. And of course, with the average price of a home in these big places, $700,000-800,000, and that includes condos, then of course young couples would need assistance in that range to be able to buy. And now a lot of times they're trying to avoid the CMHC insurance fee because it's quite expensive. They increased the price of the insurance, and so the option to put only 5% down on an $800,000 property, which should be only $40,000, is something that is very expensive for these people. And so the richer people that can tap the bank of mom and dad and come up with the 20% down payment allows them to avoid
it's almost like the CMHC insurance is a tax on the poor people who can't get help from their parents. It's such a mess. And CMHC, was trying to rein in the speculation in the real estate market a couple of years ago under the former head, who's now moved to become the head of AIMCO in Alberta, by the way. But he was kind of a lone voice, and he wasn't very successful. All that happened was people moved away from CMHC insurance, moved to the more conventional mortgages, which require 20% down payment, or to the other insurer, which is the name of that now is called Sagen, S-A-G-E-N. It used to have a different name. So the urge to own is strong. The urge to speculate is even stronger. And the belief that prices cannot go down, they can only go up, encourages people to not only put their own life savings in, but also to tap into the home equity that their parents have built up in their homes. So it's a leverage in the parents on the leverage of the home, which is now being used to lever up a new purchase of another home. It's really a form of collective insanity is what it is.
And Hilliard, we have a listener question for you that seems to be related to this. It's from Hugh Giselle. Hugh asks, the real estate market has boomed and people have more equity in their homes. Is a HELOC the only way this equity can be taken out and used to buy additional real estate or cars or vacations?
So that's the main way. If you go to the bank, you could refinance your mortgage for a higher, you could take out a mortgage, but there would be fees associated. And then the banks seem to be encouraging HELOCs. At least they were not that long ago. So they'll make it much easier for you to use a HELOC. The other thing you could do is to sell the home and buy a cheaper home or rent. And of course, nobody wants to do the rental, and there may not be that many good rentals available. But certainly you could sell and buy a cheaper place. But if you live in Vancouver or Toronto, it probably means moving to another part of the country because everything's expensive. But even in some of the smaller towns around the big cities like Toronto, the prices have gone up 20 or 30% since COVID hit. So it isn't easy. So most people that are tapping into their equity in their home, they use the HELOC. That's the way it goes. And the famous slogan from the advertising world that was developed by one of the major lenders, it's called "You're Richer Than You Think." Was exactly that. That was the whole idea of "You're Richer Than You Think" was you've got all this equity in your home that's untapped. You could tap into it. Just allow us to give you a HELOC, home equity line of credit, is what HELOC stands for, and you can have all that money to go on that vacation or buy that car. Maybe buy an electric car. I don't know. So people are doing it for sure. They don't see any risk in it, and when they look at the monthly payments, if they can afford the monthly payments, they feel like, why shouldn't I take this money? I've actually had several people say to me, they're giving me money at 1.5%, Hilliard. Why wouldn't I take that money? I'd be crazy not to take that money.
Tesla, close to your heart because you've been driving one for several years. What's happening on the Tesla front?
So the Tesla situation is interesting. The earnings are coming out tomorrow, October 20th, and the stock is trading at a very high multiple. So it's trading at about $870 a share. It's around 155 times earnings, and it's about 16 times revenue. So these numbers are, even in an era when the price-earnings ratios are 30, 40, 50, like they are for some of the big FANG stocks, this is even another level above that. Elon Musk has become the richest man in the world because he kept his share ownership pretty much entirely that he had in Tesla, which I think he owns about 20% of Tesla or something like that. So maybe more than 20% actually. Now that I think about it, yeah, it's a little bit more than 20%. So he's worth $200 billion. And the last time Tesla reported, they earned $1 billion in one quarter. So let's say they did that 4 times a year, that would be $4 billion. But the stock is worth $600-700 billion. So there's a few companies that are worth more than $1 trillion. Tesla's not there yet. So how could that possibly be? How could that possibly make sense? Well, Tesla's annual production is about to hit 1 million cars, and with the opening of 2 new factories, one in Texas and one in Germany, they will be at 2 million cars probably fairly soon. Within 18 to 24 months, they'll be at 2 million cars. So if you assume that they make $10,000, just to pick a number out of the air, profit per car on 2 million, that is $20 billion of profit. And if you put 100 times earnings on that, well, you get over $1 trillion. So it's possible. Now, of course, the ratio will come down as the earnings go up, but Tesla has a long runway ahead of them. The number of electric cars being sold in the world is about 4 or 5 million. The total number of cars being sold annually in the world has dropped dramatically, down from 100 million a year down to about 80 million. So you could see that if the electric car market goes up to 20 million out of those 80 million, just to pick a number, and Tesla has a decent share of that, they could be making 2, 3, 4, 5 million cars a year. I think Elon Musk's target for 2030 for Tesla is very ambitious. And of course, if the transition is going to be made to electric, there's going to have to be more than Tesla. There'll be many other manufacturers, like Ford has a good offering. Renault has a good offering. Volvo is working very hard to come out with 2 or 3 new cars. Volkswagen is working very hard, although they've had a few stumbles to bring out a number of electric cars. So GM's had an electric car for a long time, but they haven't emphasized it, but they say now they're going to. So, but Tesla's the leader by far. There's no question about that.
And of course, how autopilot is a Tesla. We keep seeing videos of people going down the freeway literally asleep at the wheel.
Yeah, so the autopilot, the fully self-driving option, which I bought, which I still don't have something about Tesla, they just, they suck you in, I guess, to do you pay this money up front and then you wait for them to deliver. But, so far the part, in Canada they haven't rolled it out. They've rolled it out to people in the U.S., a select group of people in the U.S., that only people that have been driving their cars very carefully and very attentively are allowed to have the fully self-driving option. And it's still probably not genuinely fully self-driving, because you still have to monitor it. But on the internet, you can find lots of people that take videos of a drive where they plug in the destination and the car basically drives itself to there obviously with the driver paying attention and being prepared to jump in if needed. So there's all kinds of somebody tweeted, for example, a picture of a stop sign, a speed limit sign had gotten turned upside down. And so the car couldn't read it, so things like that. So it's going to be a while. And of course, what's going to happen, of course, is they're going to have online monitoring. So they'll have people at different locations that are watching each car and be prepared to jump in and take over remotely if needed. But that would be more like a situation where the car got confused and just stopped in the middle of the road and didn't know what to do next. So, I think fairly soon, within 2 or 3 years, the automatic, fully self-driving cars will be better than human car drivers. Partly because the human reaction time sometimes is half to 3/4 of a second delay, whereas the machine reaction time is pretty much instantaneous. It's 20 microseconds or milliseconds or something like that. So that alone would make the computer-driven car safer, as long as it can figure out what to do about some of these special situations that it doesn't understand yet.
Yeah, they also don't like heavy rain or snow.
Yeah, they seem to be working. I saw the new one that's coming out is called Plaid, and it's got a phenomenal acceleration. So the one I have is called Ludicrous, and it's 2.5 seconds to 100 kilometers per hour. The new Plaid is 2 seconds. It's a fully half second faster. And I was surprised because people post these videos all the time. I was surprised to see somebody doing the 0 to 102 seconds in a Plaid in the middle of a rainstorm. So I thought, well, how do you do that? That's crazy. But anyway, they did it. So the car keeps getting better and better, but it'll be a while before it's good enough
for the driver to take a nap in the back seat. It may never come to that point, actually. Now, in my car right now, because I have portions of it, I don't have the full release because it's not available to Canada yet. It'll stop for traffic lights and stop signs and yield signs, that sort of thing. It slows down for crosswalks. It'll stop if you don't intervene. So that's not, you still have to intervene, but it also stops it doesn't stop just for red lights, it also stops for green lights. So you have to tell it, no, I want to keep going.
Hilliard, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Nice to be with you.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, author of the second edition of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. His website, MacBethMcLeodPartners.com. If you have any questions for Hilliard or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@HowStreet.com, our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.